You didn't have to know opera to know Beverly Sills. The American soprano died earlier this week from lung cancer at the age of 78. Most Americans knew her from her TV appearances, with Carol Burnett and the Muppets, as a guest host on Johnny Carson's Tonight Show, and from her own talk show. When she retired from singing, she ran the New York City Opera and became chair of Lincoln Center and the Metropolitan Opera. But none of this would matter if she hadn't been an extraordinary singer. We'll hear an interview Terry recorded with Beverly Sills. But first, classical music critic Lloyd Schwartz shares some thoughts about her career.
Beverly Sills was the best-loved American singer of her generation. Her nickname, Bubbles, tells a large part of the story. She was exuberant, irrepressible, effervescent, smart, and funny. And at the height of her 25-year career as an opera singer, she had one of the most beautiful voices in the world. Her fans called her Beverly Trills. I heard her a lot when she was the reigning diva of Sarah Caldwell's Opera Company of Boston from the early 1960s into the mid-70s. She was the company workhorse who sang a wide repertory that embraced Mozart, early 19th century bel canto, French Romanticism, Verdi and Puccini, and contemporary avant-garde. I can still see her flaming mop of red hair sticking out from behind the barricades in Luigi Nono's 12-tone anti-war opera Intolleranza. In Offenbach's Tales of Hoffmann, she sang all 4 leading soprano parts. And she always seemed to be having a good time. I'll never forget her cracking up on stage in The Barber of Seville when the note she was supposed to drop from her balcony fluttered into the orchestra pit. In one production, she was singing with a tenor who was so bad he refused to take a curtain call, but Sills literally dragged him out from the wings for his bow. Critic Michael Steinberg called her the kind of woman who actually catches the bouquets that are thrown at her across orchestra pits and footlights. 1966 was her landmark year. In Boston, she sang the lead in Caldwell's dazzling production of an 18th century rarity, Rameau's Hippolyte at Aricie, opposite an unknown young tenor named Placido Domingo. Sills astounded the audience with the effortless beauty and agility of her coloratura. Shortly after this, at the New York City Opera, her other operatic home, in a revival of another 18th century opera, Handel's Julius Caesar, she made headlines as the witty, seductive, self-knowing Cleopatra. After years of remaining underappreciated, she became, as they say, an overnight sensation. one regret about Sills's career is that she had the chance to change the history of opera performance, reviving a lost repertoire of Baroque operas the way Maria Callas in the 1950s rediscovered and shed new light on the forgotten early 19th century operas of Bellini, Rossini, and Donizetti. Or she could have won a whole new audience for operetta, some of her recordings of which are unsurpassed. But Sills wanted to be an opera star more than an exploring artist. She got what she wanted, and at her best she was a marvel. Her uninhibited sincerity could really touch your heart. Here's one of my favorite Sills recordings, Mozart's heavenly Ruhe sanft, Rest Peacefully, from his unfinished opera Zaida. Despite her personal tragedies, 2 children with disabilities, her daughter was deaf and couldn't hear her mother sing. Beverly Sills seemed a steamroller, as her friend violinist Isaac Stern called her, someone who would never let up or lose her sense of humor. She retired from singing at the age of 51. She told an interviewer, "I wanted people to say, 'You left too soon,' not 'You left too late.'" She became a major arts administrator and a vigorous spokesperson for the arts. Last year, she served as the delightful host for the new live Met closed-circuit telecasts in movie theaters around the world. No one else ever made a serious and demanding endeavor like opera seem like so much fun.
Lloyd Schwartz is classical music editor of the Boston Phoenix and teaches English at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. In 1985, Terry Gross talked with Beverly Sills about her career and her life. It was 5 years after she'd retired from performing and 5 years into her tenure as the general director of the New York City Opera.
You're one of the few singers of your generation who made a career by studying and performing in America. Were you told when you were getting started that you'd really better go to Europe if you expected to really have a singing career?
Well, yes, actually I received a Fulbright, which I didn't accept after going through all the business of making the tapes and presentations. There simply wasn't enough money for me to just take off and go to Europe. My mother was widowed. I had 2 brothers in school, becoming doctors under the GI Bill. But there was very limited funds. My mother was alone. I just felt that I was going to have to make it here. I just didn't feel I had the luxury of going abroad, and something inside me made me resent the fact that I couldn't make a living singing opera in my own country.
You didn't sing at the Met until 1975.
Right.
Why do you think it took them that long to invite you to sing there? Do you think it had to do with your lack of European
No, it had to do
performance?
with Rudolph Bing, period. I said that I would never sing at the Met until Mr. Bing retired. And the day after he retired, I signed the contract with Gendela, and that was that.
What was it between you and he?
Well, it started out, of course, with the idea that he really didn't feel that the American artist could add to the prestige of the Metropolitan Opera. It is true that he was there in glorious times when there was Tebaldi and Delmonico and Corelli and Bastianini and, so who needed the American? He had a great wealth of European artists to choose from. He also wrote a book about me, and about me he wrote, "How could a girl from Brooklyn know anything about singing the queens of Donizetti?" It's interesting. Why should a girl from Brooklyn know less than, let's say, a lady from Spain? English queens are English queens. It was just an attitude he had. We have since, become very close friends. He had a radio program and invited me to go on it, which I thought took a lot of courage on his part. And we found we had same kind of humor. And he announced on the radio that I was his biggest mistake, and that his greatest regret was not that I didn't sing at the Met because I proved that I didn't need the Met, but that we could have been friends for 20 years, and that he regrets.
One of the turning points in your career was when you sang the role of Cleopatra in Julius Caesar, and it was critically acclaimed.
Yeah, that was the turning point.
Now, you had told Julius Riddell, the head of the New York City Opera, that if he hired someone outside the company for the role of Cleopatra, as he had been considering doing, that you were going to quit.
Yes.
Did it ever dawn on you that he might have said, well, then goodbye?
Yes. He said to me, "You're not going to quit." I said, "Yes, I am." Well, he said, "How will that accomplish your singing Cleopatra?" And I said, "I will do my first New York recital at Carnegie Hall. Peter, my husband, has offered to give it to me as a present. And I will sing all 5 of the Cleopatra arias that are in your version." And he burst out laughing. I said to him, "Julius, take someone inside the company, not me, and I won't open my mouth. But going outside implies there's nobody within who can do it, and that simply isn't true. And it's just too demeaning. I'll never fight you on taking another soprano who's with us. That's you're the director of the company. You're supposed to take the one that you feel does it best. But to go outside means there's nobody here who can do it, and that's just a lie. So I don't accept it."
Had you ever done anything like that before?
No.
Give an ultimatum like that?
No, but you understand, in 1966, I was already 37 years old. I wasn't a young singer. In the past, when I had first begun, I didn't have financial security. It was hard for me to walk away from any job that paid me anything. I was a married woman. My husband was a very successful businessman, and it didn't worry me that I might not have enough money. My mother was cared for. Both my brothers were doctors already. So, life was moving on. And singing was not the be-all and end-all in my life. I had my husband and my family. I had a very good life outside of the opera house, so I didn't feel desperate. And I was never terribly ambitious. I never dreamed this career would happen. I wanted to sing because I loved to sing. I really did. I couldn't wait to get to the theater to sing. But when I made that ultimatum, I made it with the idea that, yes, he could say, "Look, that's my decision." I also made it from a very secure feeling of knowing that at that moment I was doing all the parts in Hoffman for him, Donna Anna, the Queen of the Night, Constanza, and the Abduction from the Seraglio. You don't replace me that easily. You have somebody who every 4th night can walk in and do 4 of the most difficult things in the repertoire. You don't just dismiss her lightly. And coming up were a tremendous number of projects that required my capabilities, such as they were, and he knew it. But in the case of the Cleopatra, was the opening night of the new theater, the opening night of its first grand opera season. I felt I had stuck with the company. I'd been with it 11 years at that point. I just felt that opening night should have been mine, particularly since the role was made for my voice.
Do you think you sang especially well that first night?
Yes, I think I did. I think the excitement caught on. I think Tregel and I were at our very, very best. We really, I looked up at one point and I thought, my God, he's a singing Gielgud. It was an extraordinary moment. I think that opening night, nobody could have touched us.
Are there any, conventions in opera that you think are really pretensions of opera that you'd like to see stripped away, like the hanky, for instance?
Yes. Yeah, I'd like to see all pretensions in opera stripped away. I'd like to see a much more naturalistic approach to the acting. Corelli had it. He knew how to lean back against the wall and sing the third act aria in Tosca just by putting his hands in his pockets. I hate operatic poses. I think we shouldn't be afraid to turn our backs on the audience while we're singing, if it's a natural movement to make. I think we shouldn't hesitate to sing an ugly tone if the word we're saying is an ugly one that should be spit out and not prettily voiced. And I'd like to see lighting much more naturalistic. If it's a hot summer Mediterranean day, I'd like you to feel that the people are sweaty. It's a given that I'd like to have beautiful singing. I mean, there is no opera without a beautiful voice. But for me, that's only about 60% of the evening. The other 40 is to touch me emotionally and intellectually.
When you look back on your career in music now from the vantage point of being the director of the New York City Opera, are there any things that you really wish you could have done differently or want to change?
Nothing. There isn't even a role I left undone. It's funny. I would have perhaps liked to have sung more in Europe, but with my children, that was impossible to put so much distance between us. Other than that, can't think of a single thing I'd have done differently.